Concordia Prime wasn't like Earth. The massive space station floated between star systems, a neutral ground where aliens from every corner of the galaxy sent their kids to learn about each other. The hallways buzzed with species Jake had only seen in textbooks back home. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few didn't even have solid bodies. It was supposed to be a place of unity and understanding. But Jake was learning that bullies exist everywhere in the universe. He first noticed her on his third day at Zenith Academy. Velani was hard to miss, even though she seemed to try her best to blend into the walls. Her skin glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed gently, like a heartbeat you could see. The Lumini were beautiful in an otherworldly way, but Velani moved differently than the other students. She made soft clicking sounds as she walked, her head tilting slightly as the echoes bounced back to her. Jake had read about echolocation in his orientation materials. The Lumini could see the world through sound. The main stairwell at Zenith Academy was a grand thing, spiraling down 3 levels with polished railings that gleamed under the artificial lights. Students from dozens of worlds passed through it every day, their voices creating a constant hum of different languages and frequencies. At exactly 2 in the afternoon station time, Jake was heading to his quantum physics class when he saw them. 3 Korthax students stood at the top of the stairs like they owned the place. They were massive, easily twice Jake's size, with 6 powerful arms and scales that looked like they could stop a bullet. Their eyes tracked Velani as she approached, making her clicking sounds, unaware of what was coming. Jake slowed his pace, something in his gut telling him to pay attention. The lead Korthax, a brute named Grax, grinned as Velani reached the top step. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, her slight frame making her look even more fragile next to the towering reptilians. Her clicks echoed off the walls, mapping her path forward. Then Grax shoved her. It wasn't a bump or an accident. It was deliberate and cruel. Velani's arms windmilled as she lost her balance, her clicking sounds becoming frantic as she tumbled down the stairs. Her small body hit each step with sickening thuds that made Jake's stomach turn. She landed at the bottom in a crumpled heap, her glow flickering weakly. The 3 Korthax laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed through the stairwell. Other students walked past like nothing had happened. A tall crystalline being stepped over Velani without breaking stride. 2 bird-like aliens glanced down but kept moving. Jake stood frozen for a moment, his brain trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Back on Earth, if someone pushed a blind girl down the stairs, there would be chaos. Teachers would come running. Students would help. Security would be called immediately. Here, nobody seemed to care. Jake rushed down the stairs, his shoes squeaking on the polished floor. He dropped to his knees beside Velani, his hands hovering uncertainly. He didn't know Lumini biology. What if he heard her trying to help? "Hey, are you okay? Can you hear me?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, shaken by what he'd just seen. Velani flinched at his voice, her clicking sounds becoming rapid and distressed. Her glow pulsed erratically, and Jake could see scrapes along her arms where they'd hit the stairs. She pushed herself up shakily, turning her face toward him even though her eyes couldn't see him. "Please," she whispered, her voice surprisingly melodic despite the pain. "Please just leave me alone." "But you're hurt. Let me help you to the medical bay." "No." The word came out sharp, almost desperate. She pulled away from him, stumbling as she tried to orient herself. Her clicks were all wrong now, confused by her own panic. "You'll only make it worse. Please." Jake watched helplessly as she limped away, one hand trailing along the wall for guidance, her echolocation too disrupted to work properly. Students parted around her like water around a rock, their conversations never pausing. At the top of the stairs, the 3 Korthax were already gone, disappeared into the crowd like they'd done nothing wrong. Jake's roommate found him still kneeling at the bottom of the stairs 5 minutes later, staring at the spot where Velani had fallen. "You saw the Daily Show, huh?" His roommate was a centauri named Arwax, with purple skin and too many eyes. "Daily?" Jake's voice was hollow. "That happens every day?" Arwax's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Jake had learned meant discomfort. "Every day at 2 o'clock, station time. Been going on for months now. She never reports it, never fights back. Her people are pacifists, you know. They believe suffering is a path to enlightenment or something. And everyone just watches?" The Korthax have diplomatic immunity. Their empire is powerful and the station doesn't want trouble. Besides, without a formal complaint from Velani herself, there's nothing anyone can do. Arwax's tentacles shrugged in a way that suggested he'd made peace with this reality. "That's just how things work here." Jake stood slowly, his fists clenched at his sides. His ribs ached where he'd slammed into the railing in his rush to help. He looked up at the stairs, at the streams of students passing by like nothing had happened. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Velani falling, kept hearing the sound of her body hitting the steps. Back home, his mom had always told him that standing up for others was what separated good people from cowards. His dad had taught him that if you see something wrong and do nothing, you're part of the problem. Tomorrow was another day. 2 o'clock would come again. And Jake was starting to realize that the rules here were broken. Jake couldn't get Velani out of his head. For 2 days, he watched from a distance as the same scene played out at exactly 2 o'clock. The Korthax would wait at the top of the stairs like predators at a watering hole. Velani would approach with her gentle clicking sounds, mapping the world she couldn't see. And then they'd push her. Every single time. What made Jake's blood boil wasn't just the cruelty. It was how normal everyone treated it. Students stepped over her fallen body like she was a piece of furniture. Teachers walked past without a second glance. The station security guards, when they happened to be nearby, suddenly found their data pads incredibly interesting. On the 3rd day, Jake made a decision. If nobody else was going to help, he would figure out how. He started with research. The station's library was massive, filled with information about every species in the known galaxy. Jake found a quiet corner and pulled up everything he could about the Lumini. They were an ancient race, philosophical and gentle. Their whole culture was built around the concept of transcending physical suffering through mental discipline. They believed that acknowledging pain gave it power, so they simply chose not to acknowledge it. It sounded beautiful in theory. In practice, it meant Velani would never report what was happening to her because doing so would mean admitting she hadn't spiritually risen above it. To her people, calling for help would bring more shame than the daily beatings. Jake's hands curled into fists as he read. What kind of philosophy lets a kid get hurt every day and calls it enlightenment? Next, he researched the Korthax. Warriors. Conquerors. A species that had built an empire through strength and intimidation. Their culture valued dominance above all else. Showing mercy was seen as weakness. The strong took what they wanted and the weak learned to stay out of their way. The pieces started fitting together in an ugly picture. Velani was the perfect victim. Her people wouldn't let her fight back or seek help, and the Korthax knew it. They'd found someone they could torment with absolute impunity. But Jake still didn't understand why everyone else just accepted it. That answer came from an unexpected source. He was eating lunch in the cafeteria when he overheard 2 teachers talking at the next table. They thought they were speaking quietly, but Jake's human hearing was sharper than they realized. I hate watching it happen, one of them said, an insectoid being with 4 arms. But what can we do? The Korthax ambassador made it clear that any discipline of their students would be seen as an act of hostility. Politics, the other teacher spat, her tentacles writhing with frustration. 3 kids torture another one every day, and we can't do anything because their government waves diplomatic immunity around like a weapon. Jake's appetite disappeared. So the adults knew. They all knew. They just valued political stability more than protecting a blind girl. He needed to find Velani and talk to her, but she was like a ghost in the hallways. She timed her movements to avoid crowds, staying close to walls where her echolocation worked best. It took Jake 2 more days of careful observation to figure out her patterns. She spent her lunch periods in the station's garden dome, a massive greenhouse that simulated an Earth-like environment. Jake found her there on a Friday afternoon, sitting on a bench surrounded by rustling leaves and chirping earth birds. Her head tilted slightly as she listened, her skin glowing softly in contentment. The sounds here are beautiful, Jake said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Velani's glow dimmed immediately. Her clicking sound started up, mapping his position. You're the human who tried to help me, she said. It wasn't a question. Jake. My name's Jake. He sat down on the bench, keeping a respectful distance. And yeah, that was me. I asked you to leave me alone. I know. I'm bad at following directions. Jake watched a butterfly land on a nearby flower. Can I ask you something? Why do you let them hurt you? Velani was quiet for a long moment. The garden sounds filled the silence between them. You wouldn't understand. Your people don't follow the path of transcendence. Try me. She turned her face toward him, and even though her eyes couldn't see, Jake felt like she was looking right through him. Suffering is temporary. The spirit is eternal. When I transcend this physical pain, I'll achieve a higher state of consciousness. Acknowledging the harm they do would tie me to the physical world, would give them power over my spirit. Jake thought about that. He thought about her falling down the stairs every day, about the bruises he could see on her arms even through her glowing skin, about how she limped when she thought nobody was watching. "That's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard," he said flatly. Velani's glow flared bright with surprise and indignation. "How dare you? No, listen. I respect your culture, I really do. But there's a difference between choosing to endure something and being forced to suffer because asking for help would make you look bad." Jake leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Those guys hurt you because they enjoy it. They're cowards who pick on someone who won't fight back. And every day you let it happen they get bolder. What happens when pushing you downstairs isn't fun anymore? When do they stop?" Velani's clicking became agitated. "You don't understand our ways." "You're right, I don't. But I understand bullies. I had them back on Earth too. And the only thing that stops a bully is someone standing up to them." "And what would you have me do?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Report them? My family would be shamed. Fight back? I can't even see them coming. Accept your help? That would prove I'm too weak to walk my own path." Jake stood up slowly. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just saying that maybe your path doesn't have to include getting beaten up every day." He started to walk away, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave. Braver than those Korthax jerks will ever be." As Jake left the garden, he heard Velani's soft clicking sounds resume, but they sounded different somehow. Uncertain. That night, Jake made his decision. If Velani couldn't ask for help and the system wouldn't provide it, then he'd have to act on his own. He didn't have a plan yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock he was going to be at those stairs. And he was going to say the one word that needed saying: enough. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as he climbed the main stairwell at 1:55. His hands were sweating and he wiped them on his pants for the third time in as many minutes. He'd spent the entire night researching Korthax physiology and combat styles, watching old wrestling matches his dad had saved on his data pad, and trying to remember every self-defense move his uncle had taught him back on Earth. It all felt inadequate now, standing at the top of these stairs, waiting. RYX had tried to talk him out of it that morning. "You're going to get yourself killed," his roommate had said, his multiple eyes blinking with genuine concern. "The Korthax outweigh you by 150 kilos each. Their scales are like armor. Just stay out of it." But Jake couldn't. He tried. He'd spent 3 nights lying awake, telling himself this wasn't his problem, that he should keep his head down and focus on his studies. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Velani falling, heard the sound of her body hitting the steps, saw the way everyone just walked past her broken form. At 1:58, the first students started filtering through the stairwell on their way to afternoon classes. Jake positioned himself right at the top landing, his back straight, trying to look more confident than he felt. A group of avian students gave him curious looks but kept moving. A crystalline being paused, seemed to consider saying something, then thought better of it and walked on. At 1:59 he heard it. The distinctive clicking sounds that meant Velani was approaching from the east corridor. His mouth went dry. At exactly 2 o'clock, the Korthax arrived from the opposite direction. Grax saw Jake first. The massive reptilian's eyes narrowed, and he said something to his 2 friends in their harsh, guttural language. All 3 of them laughed. They clearly didn't see a 17-year-old human as any kind of threat. Velani's clicking sounds grew closer. Jake could see her now, moving carefully along the wall, her fingers trailing the surface for reference points. She had no idea what was about to happen. Her echolocation painted a picture of the space ahead, but it couldn't tell her about intentions or danger. The Korthax moved into position, the same spot they always waited. Grax's grin showed rows of sharp teeth. Jake stepped directly between them and Velani. The clicking sound stopped. Velani had detected him, her head tilting in confusion. She knew someone was blocking the path but not who or why. "Move, human." Grax's voice was like gravel scraping against metal. His translator chip made his words understandable, but couldn't hide the menace behind them. "This doesn't concern your weak species." Jake's voice came out steadier than he expected. "No. Just that. One word." But it felt like the most important word he'd ever spoken. Therm and Vec, the other 2 Korthax, exchanged glances. Students in the stairwell had stopped moving, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Word was spreading quickly through the crowd. Humans almost never challenged other species physically. They were known for being diplomatic, adaptable, good at negotiations. Not fighters. "Last chance," Grax growled, taking a step forward. "Walk away or we'll move you ourselves." Behind Jake, Velani's clicking resumed, rapid and panicked. "Human, what are you doing? Please just let them pass. You don't understand." "I understand enough," Jake said, never taking his eyes off Grax. His uncle's words echoed in his head. In a real fight, you won't win with strength. You win by being smarter, faster, and more willing to do what's necessary. Grax reached out with 2 of his 6 arms, clearly intending to simply shove Jake aside like an annoying obstacle. He wasn't even taking the human seriously enough to use all his limbs. That was his first mistake. Jake had spent hours watching videos of Korthak's fighting styles. They relied on overwhelming strength and intimidation. They expected opponents to either submit or try to match their power. They didn't expect what Jake did next. As Grax's hands came toward him, Jake didn't resist. Instead, he grabbed both wrists and dropped his weight backward and down, using a judo technique called a sacrifice throw. Grax's own momentum and considerable mass worked against him. The Korthax's eyes widened in shock as he found himself suddenly airborne, his balance completely lost. Grax tumbled down the stairs with a series of thunderous crashes that echoed through the stairwell. His armored scales protected him from serious injury, but his pride took a devastating hit. The mighty Korthax warrior had been thrown like a child by a human half his size. The crowd gasped. Velani's clicking sounds went absolutely wild, painting a picture of chaos her mind couldn't quite process. Therm and Vec roared in fury. No more playing around. They both charged at Jake simultaneously, 6 arms each reaching to tear him apart. Jake's heart felt like it was going to explode out of his chest. Fear threatened to freeze him in place, but he forced himself to move. He couldn't match their strength, so he didn't try. When Therm lunged from the left, Jake sidestepped at the last possible second and gave him a hard shove in the same direction he was already moving. Therm crashed directly into Vec, their combined momentum sending both of them stumbling. But they recovered fast. Vec's tail whipped around, catching Jake in the ribs. Pain exploded through his side and he heard something crack. The world spun for a moment, but he stayed on his feet through sheer willpower. Therm came at him again, more careful this time. Jake tried to dodge, but the Korthax was learning. 2 arms grabbed Jake's shoulders while 2 more went for his legs. Jake twisted desperately, managed to break one grip, but Therm was too strong. He lifted Jake off the ground like he weighed nothing. For a terrifying moment, Jake thought he was about to be thrown down the stairs himself. His ribs screamed with pain. Blood ran from his nose where Vec had clipped him earlier. This was it. He tried, but he wasn't strong enough. Then he remembered something his uncle had said. When someone grabs you, they've also given you targets they can't protect. Jake brought his elbow down hard on the nerve cluster where Therm's neck met his shoulder. Korthak's physiology was different from humans, but pain was universal. Therm's grip loosened just enough for Jake to twist free, and he fell heavily to the ground. The fight had lasted maybe 90 seconds, but it felt like hours. Jake could barely breathe, every breath sending fire through his cracked ribs. His face was swelling and he could taste blood. Grax had climbed back up the stairs, murder in his eyes. All 3 Korthax circled him now, done playing games. They were going to really hurt him this time. But Jake pushed himself to his feet. His legs shook and he swayed slightly, but he stayed standing. He looked at Grax, at Therm, at Vec, and despite the pain, despite the fear, he smiled. That all you got? The Korthax stared at him like he was insane. Maybe he was. A human who wouldn't stay down, who kept getting back up no matter how hard they hit him. It was something they'd never encountered before. Grax made a frustrated sound and started forward again, but Vec grabbed his arm, speaking quickly in their language. Jake caught enough through the translator to understand. Too many witnesses, too much attention, not worth the diplomatic incident. The 3 bullies backed away slowly, their eyes promising retribution. This isn't over, human, Grax snarled. Next time there won't be an audience. They disappeared into the crowd, leaving Jake standing alone at the top of the stairs, broken but unbowed. Jake spent that night in the medical bay. The doctor, a spider-like alien with too many legs and a surprisingly gentle touch, confirmed what Jake already knew. 3 cracked ribs, a fractured cheekbone, and enough bruising to make him look like he'd gone 10 rounds with a freight shuttle. The doctor clicked disapprovingly while wrapping his ribs, muttering about foolish young humans and their tendency toward self-destructive heroics. But Jake didn't regret it. Not even when breathing hurt so badly he could barely sleep. The next day he dragged himself out of bed at 1:30 and made his way to the stairs. Every step was agony. RYX had begged him to stay in their room, had practically tried to physically restrain him. But Jake knew what would happen if he didn't show up. The Korthax would see his absence as surrender, as proof that humans were weak after all. And Velani would be alone again. At 1:55, Jake took his position at the top of the stairs, one hand pressed against his wrapped ribs. Students stared as they passed. Some looked at him with respect, others with pity, and a few with the kind of morbid curiosity people have when they think they're about to witness something terrible. 2 o'clock came and went. No Korthax. No Vellani either, but Jake spotted her in the crowd, hanging back, her clicking sounds uncertain. The second day was the same. Jake stood at his post, breathing through the pain, waiting. The Korthax never showed. Rumors spread through the school like wildfire. Some said the Korthax were planning something worse. Others claimed they were afraid of the crazy human who wouldn't stay down. Jake didn't know what to believe, but he kept showing up. On the third day things got interesting. Jake arrived at 1:45 earlier than usual. He was adjusting his position when he noticed other students gathering on the stairs. Not passing through, actually stopping and standing. A tall crystalline student named Crix positioned himself 2 steps below Jake. Then came 2 avian students, their feathers ruffled but their beaks set in determination. Even Arwex showed up, his multiple eyes blinking nervously but his stance solid. "What are you doing?" Jake asked, confused. Arwex's tentacles twisted and what Jake had learned was his species equivalent of a shrug. "You're my roommate. You're an idiot, but you're my idiot. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed." More students arrived. A massive being made of living rock. 3 small furry creatures who barely came up to Jake's knee but whose teeth looked very sharp. A liquid-form species that Jake still didn't fully understand. By 1:55, there were 20 students on those stairs, representing a dozen different worlds. None of them were warriors. None of them were particularly tough. But they all stood together. At exactly 2 o'clock the Korthax arrived. But this time, Grax had brought reinforcements. 9 Korthax total, all of them bigger than the original 3. They stopped at the top of the stairs, taking in the scene before them. The stairwell went completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His ribs throbbed with every breath. This was bad. 9 against 20 might sound like decent odds, but the Korthax were trained fighters. Most of these students had never thrown a punch in their lives. But nobody moved. Nobody backed down. Grax's eyes swept across the crowd, calculating. Jake saw the exact moment the Korthax realized the problem. They could win this fight, sure. But there were too many witnesses. Too many species represented. Too many governments that would have to be answered to. The violence would be recorded, analyzed, turned into a diplomatic nightmare. "This isn't over," Grax said, his voice carrying across the silent stairwell. But even as he said it, Jake could hear the uncertainty. The Korthax backed away slowly, their postures aggressive but their retreat steady. They disappeared into the crowd and for a moment nobody moved. Then Crix started a slow clicking sound with his crystalline body, a rhythmic pattern that others began to join. It wasn't quite applause, more like acknowledgement. Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment and pride in equal measure. That night everything changed. The Korthax ambassador lodged a formal complaint with the station authorities. Jake was called to the headmaster's office and found himself facing 3 administrators, all of them looking decidedly uncomfortable. They accused him of assault, of starting fights, of disturbing the peace. They showed him footage from the first confrontation, edited to make it look like Jake had attacked unprovoked. Jake sat there, his ribs aching, listening to them twist the truth into something ugly. When they finished he simply said, "Check the full footage. Go back further. See what happens every day at 2 o'clock. The administrators exchanged glances. One of them, a being that looked like animated smoke, shifted uncomfortably. "Young human, we understand you think you were helping, but there are proper channels. Proper channels that have let a blind girl get beaten every single day for months?" Jake's voice was quiet but hard. "Proper channels that turn away because it's politically inconvenient? Those proper channels?" They didn't have an answer for that. Someone must have listened though, because that night, station security finally reviewed the full footage. Not just the fight but months of recordings. Every single time the Korthax had pushed Vellani down those stairs. Every time students and teachers had walked past. Every time security had looked the other way. The footage leaked. Jake never found out who did it, but suddenly it was everywhere. The Galactic Education Network picked it up. News feeds across 100 worlds showed the same scene over and over. A small, glowing figure being shoved downstairs while crowds simply walked past. And then it showed a human, alone, stepping between the bullies and their victim. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Lumini advocacy groups demanded answers. Human Diplomatic Corps issued strongly worded statements. Even species that had nothing to do with either the Lumini or humans began asking uncomfortable questions about what kind of education system allowed such systematic cruelty. The story went viral in ways the station authorities had never anticipated. Human Defends Blind Student became a rallying cry across dozens of worlds. Artists created murals. Musicians wrote songs. A human standing alone against impossible odds, refusing to back down, refusing to accept that cruelty was just politics as usual. 3 days later, Velani's father arrived on the station. He found Jake in the library, studying for an exam he'd missed while recovering. The older Lumini stood there for a long moment, his skin glowing with emotions Jake couldn't read. Then he bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in his culture. "You protected my daughter when her own philosophy left her defenseless," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You shamed me, human. You shamed all of us who let this happen because acknowledging it would mean admitting our beliefs failed her." Jake didn't know what to say to that. The Korthax Empire's response came swiftly and brutally. Within a week, all 9 students involved in the stairwell incidents were recalled home. For Grax, Therm and Vec, the punishment was severe by their culture's standards. They were sent to a military discipline colony on the Outer Rim, a place where weakness and dishonor were beaten out of young Korthax through relentless training and isolation. In their society, there was no greater shame than being labeled a coward, and attacking someone weaker than yourself definitely qualified. The galactic embarrassment had forced their hand. The Korthax prided themselves on being honorable warriors, not bullies who picked on blind girls. The footage had made them look pathetic, and that was something their empire couldn't tolerate. But the real changes happened at Zenith Academy itself. Jake was sitting in his quantum physics class, trying to focus despite his still healing ribs, when the announcement came over the station-wide communication system. The headmaster's voice, usually so smooth and diplomatic, sounded strained and uncomfortable. New protocols were being implemented immediately. Anonymous reporting systems for harassment and bullying. Mandatory training for all staff on recognizing and addressing abuse. Most importantly, a new rule that made it crystal clear. Diplomatic immunity for students was suspended in cases of physical violence. No government, no matter how powerful, would be allowed to shield their children from consequences if they hurt others. It was everything Jake had wanted, but hearing it announced felt hollow somehow. All of this had been possible before. The tools had existed. The authority had been there. They'd just chosen not to use them because it was easier to look away. The weeks that followed were strange. Jake became something of a celebrity on the station, though he hated every minute of it. Students wanted selfies with him. Younger kids looked at him with wide eyes. Teachers who'd previously ignored him now nodded respectfully in the hallways. It was weird and uncomfortable, and Jake mostly just wanted everyone to forget about it and move on. The only attention he didn't mind was from Velani. She'd started joining him for lunch in the Garden Dome, the place where they'd had their first real conversation. At first, she'd been formal and distant, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Her people's philosophy of transcendence through suffering had been challenged in the most public way possible, and she was struggling with what that meant. "I should be angry with you," she said one afternoon, her clicking sounds mapping the leaves rustling around them. "You made my private struggle into a galactic spectacle. You took away my choice to handle it my own way." Jake bit into his sandwich, thinking about how to respond. "You're right," he finally said. "I didn't ask your permission. I just saw someone getting hurt and couldn't stand by. That's very human of you." There was something in her tone that wasn't quite criticism but wasn't quite a compliment either. "Is that a bad thing?" Velani was quiet for a moment, her head tilted as she listened to the garden sounds. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. My people believe that suffering should be transcended internally, that asking for help is weakness. But I'm starting to wonder if maybe that philosophy only works when the suffering is natural, when it's something you can actually transcend." She paused. "How do you transcend someone deliberately hurting you every day? Maybe that's not enlightenment. Maybe that's just giving up." Jake didn't say anything, just let her work through her thoughts. "My father told me something when he visited," she continued. "He said that wisdom isn't about rigidly following philosophy even when it harms you. It's about knowing when to adapt, when to accept that maybe your understanding was incomplete." Her glow pulsed softly. "I'm still figuring out what that means for me." Their friendship grew slowly but steadily. Velani helped Jake with his mathematics homework, which was way harder than anything he'd studied on Earth. Her echolocation gave her an intuitive understanding of spatial relationships that made advanced geometry seem simple. In return, Jake described colors to her, trying to translate visual concepts into sounds and feelings she could understand. "Red is like a loud, warm sound," he'd explain. "Like drums or a crackling fire. Blue is quieter, cooler. Like rain or distant waves. Vellani would tilt her head, processing these descriptions, turning them into something her mind could grasp. She was brilliant in ways Jake couldn't even fully comprehend, and he felt lucky to call her a friend. The station-wide assembly happened a month after the incidents. Every student and staff member was required to attend. The auditorium was massive, designed to hold thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds. Jake sat near the back with Arwax, hoping to avoid attention. The headmaster gave a long speech about tolerance and unity and the importance of standing up for each other. It was full of the kind of empty words that adults use when they want to sound profound without actually committing to anything specific. Jake tuned most of it out. Then the headmaster called his name. Jake's stomach dropped. Arwax elbowed him encouragingly as he made his way to the stage, feeling thousands of eyes on him. His ribs had mostly healed, but the walk still felt long and uncomfortable. The headmaster presented him with some kind of commendation, a fancy crystal thing that probably meant something to someone. The audience applauded, various species making their own versions of approving sounds. Jake took the award and stepped up to the microphone, his mouth suddenly dry. He hadn't prepared a speech. He'd kind of hoped this wouldn't happen at all. Thanks, he started awkwardly. But honestly, I don't think I deserve this. I just did what anyone should do when they see someone getting hurt. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, scales, feathers, and other features. The real hero here is Vellani, for finally speaking up about what was happening to her. And all the students who stood with me on those stairs, who decided that protecting each other matters more than staying safe. He could see Vellani in the crowd, her bioluminescent skin glowing brightly, and he directed his next words to her. I learned something important here. My species might not be the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. But we're really good at one thing: we don't give up on each other. When we see someone suffering and everyone else says that's just how things are, we say, enough. And we mean it. The applause that followed was genuine this time, not the polite recognition from before. Jake made his way back to his seat, his face burning with embarrassment. That evening, Jake found himself back at the main stairwell at 2 o'clock. Not because he expected trouble, but because promises mattered. He'd told Vellani he'd be there, and some part of him felt like he needed to keep that commitment, even though the danger had passed. To his surprise, he wasn't alone. Vellani was there too, her clicking sounds echoing in the empty space. You don't have to keep doing this, she said softly. They're gone. I'm safe now. I know, Jake replied. Just wanted to make sure. They stood there together in comfortable silence, human and Lumini, two kids from different worlds who'd found common ground in the simplest of concepts. Kindness matters, cruelty is never acceptable, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just say no when everyone else is saying yes. Thank you, Jake, Vellani said finally, for being dangerous. Jake smiled, remembering their conversation in the garden. Dangerous to bullies, you mean? Dangerous to injustice. Dangerous to cruelty. Dangerous to the idea that some suffering is just inevitable. Her glow pulsed warmly. The galaxy needs more humans like you. As they walked away from the stairs together, Jake realized something important. He hadn't changed the whole galaxy. He hadn't solved every problem or fixed every broken system. But he'd helped one person. He'd stood up when it mattered. And maybe that was enough. Sometimes being human meant being the person who refused to accept that cruelty was just politics as usual. And Jake was okay with that.